Denise Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal, Book 3 of the Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 18. Drew was thinking that perhaps he could come up with an excuse to stay home, get some work done, when, at that moment, she popped out through the front door of her clinic and stood on her front stoop and held her arms out at her sides. Ta-da! In a word, Naomi looked adorable. She wore a pair of tight-fitting jeans that loved her gentle curves. She spun around in a circle, and he got a good look at the way the jeans hugged her bottom, and he went hot with desire. He forced himself to focus on her attire, for safety's sake, to make sure she was properly dressed. And yes, she was dressed well for the weather. Her boots were sturdy and steel-toed. She wore a parka, a pair of mittens, a scarf around her neck, and a woolen cap perched on her head. "Do you approve?" she asked anxiously. Yes, oh yes, he did more than approve. He loved it. "You look great." She dropped her arms and looked up at him shyly. "Thanks." He longed to step forward, cup her cheeks in his hands, and kiss those beautiful, full lips. He also wanted to grab her firm derriere and squeeze, pressing her against his desire. The thought of all he longed to do to her made him groan inwardly. This hike, this impromptu hike, was so dangerous for him, for both of them, and on so many different levels. "Okay," he said, "so let's get in my truck." "Sounds good to me," she said. As they walked across the street to the parking lot behind his clinic, he longed to reach for her hand, but didn't. He handed her up into the cab and slid behind the wheel. They drove to the hiking trail he had in mind. "I've actually never walked this particular trail myself," he said. "I always drive past it on my way to work every morning, and I've promised myself that one day I'd visit it, but one day never comes." "Until today," she said in a voice of wonder. "Wow, I can't believe you've never hiked this trail before." "I've been really busy with my practice, and besides, I'm not that much into hiking." He considered a moment, then continued. "If I had my druthers, I'd rather fish or build a piece of furniture or read a book." "It does amaze me a little that you don't want to hike when you've got such a gorgeous view of mountains from your back window." "I know," he said with a bemused smile, "but it's really Paul who's more of a hiker. He's the one who lives in a shack out in the wilderness." "I find it hard to believe that you're not a mountain man yourself." "I'd rather read or fish." "My dad likes to fish," she said. "Your dad, he asked, hoping she might reveal more of her family. "Yes," she said wistfully. "You know something, Drew, it must be so nice to have a brother, even if you two aren't very much alike. I'm sure the two of you share some similarities." "We do," he said, and then he realized what she'd just said. "Oh," he said, taken aback. "So you grew up an only child?" "No, I had a brother, but he died." "Oh," he said, and a long silence followed. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "Well, it happened a long time ago. My father raised me." "What happened to your mother?" "Oh, she left us." "Oh, wow." "She just couldn't handle it. After my brother, passed. So she left us. One day she came downstairs and stood in the family room and she was crying. She told my dad and me that she just couldn't take it anymore and she had to leave. And so she did. That's terrible. I don't know so much. My dad was great. He made up for it, I think. Yes, he more than made up for it. Drew was shocked. He'd grown up in a household where both parents were happily married, and they'd raised their two sons in a household filled with love and laughter. Both of his parents had been involved in their childhoods. As a boy, his father had achieved the rank of Eagle, and he was keen to see his sons active in scouting, and both Paul and Drew earned their Eagle rank, making their dad so proud. She glanced over at him and smiled. I was just thinking about my own childhood. I was very active in scouting with Paul and my dad. You don't need to feel sorry for me, she said. I had a good childhood. My dad took good care of me, and he waited a long time before he finally found someone else he could love. When he met the lady who later became my stepmother, they both made sure that I was okay with everything, and she was so nice to me. Even so, he detected an edge of sadness in her voice as she looked away. He felt so sorry for her. It's okay, she said at last. My mother, my real mother, my biological mother, dropped into town from time to time and visited us, but you've got to understand, my brother's death haunted her. I can imagine, he said simply. And so, she said with a wry smile pulling at the corners of her lips, that's why I grew up to become a cold-hearted, cold-blooded surgeon. Well, there you go, he said, and looked over at her, and then they burst out laughing. He laughed and laughed as he made the turn to the state park. As she wiped tears of laughter from her eyes, he found a parking spot and killed the engine. The silence between them this time felt oddly comforting and friendly. The tension between them had dissipated. He smiled over at her, and she grinned. He'd never visited this park, even though he lived within a mile of it. It meant something to him to explore it now with Naomi. He smiled to himself as he climbed out of the cab. Okay, he said. Now here's the really good thing. You've got your choice of trails. There's a short one that's accessible for handicapped people. It's only a half-mile long. There's a longer one, an easy walk of 1.5 miles. It's an easy looping trail, and there's a longer one of 3 miles, and it's a complete loop and has some pretty significant peaks and valleys. That one takes a path around my lake and back of my house. And then there's a really long one, a 10-mile hike, and it circles around my lake as well. She tapped her chin. Let me see. I don't think the handicap trail will give me a workout, nor will the 1.5-mile one. So let's go with the 3-mile one, what say? One of these days, perhaps, we'll try the long one, he said. Okay, she chirped, let's go. They began the walk, and after the first mile, they were both ready for a short water break. They sat down on a hillock in the sun. As he shared his gallon-sized jug of water with her, he said, Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but we haven't seen a soul since we got here, and it's going to stay that way for a while. But once the big hotel and spa is built, he pointed up the mountainside to the plume of dust, this place won't be anywhere near as tranquil and serene. Oh, she said, her brow contracting with tension, that's so awful. But something else in her expression troubled him. Are you okay? Oh, I'm fine, really. I agree with you. I hate to see this pristine beauty ruined. You sure there isn't something else bothering you? No, she assured him hastily. Not at all. Yeah, I gotta admit, it'll be good for the town itself. That's true, she said. I gotta be honest with you, Naomi. My practice was starting to stagnate. Really? Yes, really, which is why I got all worked up for no good reason when Mrs. Darjeeling left me. You sure? She asked with a teasing smile. Are you sure you weren't a little bit jealous of me, snagging away a valuable patient like Mrs. Darjeeling and her irascible twin girls? He grinned. I'll admit, I'm a bit competitive too. Good to know, she smiled. You do know, don't you, when Vittorio Velasquez brings in his own special doctor, there'll be competition for patients for both of us. This caught her attention. She sat up sharply. Vittorio's bringing in his own doctor? Ah, yes, apparently this doctor's a specialist in plastic surgery. So we'll start seeing a lot of ladies with Botox and Restylane injections in their faces soon. Oh, great, just great. Oh, and that reminds me. What? The hotel's coming with private units, kind of like condos or something. I overheard someone at the grocery the other day talking about timeshares. And there'll be another doctor for the spa and clinic as well. He shrugged. Although that last little bit, having a second doctor in a staff position, that's just a rumor. That's a tremendous amount of change, she said. It is. I'm surprised you're down with it all, especially when I thought you hated change. I do, he admitted. Change was what happened when Danielle got bored and left him. Change was what happened when his dad asked him to come to Alaska for a little while and run his practice for him while he recuperated from his cancer treatments. And the little while turned into a 5-year sojourn ending with his father's death. So, yes, change usually brought pain. All the same, he might hate change, but it brought Naomi. And thus far, she was still here, which was a good thing. And it didn't look too darn likely as if she planned to leave anytime soon. He did wonder what she'd do once she realized that she missed her calling too much to ignore it any longer and headed back to Los Angeles. For the time being, though, she was here, snuggled up close to him, as close as she'd sat in the truck beside him when Paul drove them up to the lumber mill. If he stayed here for one more minute, he'd try to kiss her. So, with a reluctant sigh, he grabbed his haversack. You ready to see the view from the backside of the lake looking up at my cabin? Absolutely, she said. Comparing her to Danielle was unfair to Naomi. The only thing these two women shared in common was an MD behind their names. Nothing else. Danielle hated hiking, and Naomi had been so happy to go with him. Naomi possessed a playful spirit. She was one of those rare kinds of people who lived in the moment. She'd endured more than her share of pain, too. She'd lost a brother. She'd lost a mother. She didn't whine about it, though. She took comfort from where comfort had been offered to her, in the kindness of her stepmother and her father, who'd stayed put and raised her to adulthood. She was a well-brought-up girl and an amazing surgeon. There was a hidden grief there, too. She couldn't completely hide it. and he longed to plumb the recesses of her heart.